Some insights arrive quietly and leave the same way. Not because time runs out, but because the psyche does not linger once its work is done. There are moments when something essential can be recognized only once, not repeated, not revisited, not summoned again in the same form. November 16th is not a deadline, and it is not an event waiting to happen. It is a psychological closing window, a point at which an inner configuration finishes assembling itself and then moves on. What finds you now does not pursue you later. Not out of punishment, but out of completion. This message is not trying to convince you or pull you forward. It either resonates immediately or it never will in quite the same way again. Consciousness has seasons, just like the body does. Certain perceptions belong to a narrow phase of readiness. And once that phase passes, the mind reorganizes and stops asking the same questions. This isn't about what will happen after November 16th. It's about what stops repeating once it's finally understood. And the subtle unease that comes from sensing that something is closing without drama, without force, and without explanation, simply because its function is finished. Jung approached this phenomenon with striking clarity. He observed that the psyche does not speak endlessly. It communicates through images, intuitions, tensions, and symbols only for as long as consciousness needs them. Once the message has been absorbed, the language disappears. As he put it, the unconscious compensates the conscious attitude. That compensation is not permanent. It exists only while imbalance exists. When awareness shifts and the inner structure adjusts, the compensatory signal withdraws, not because the issue has been solved in a logical sense, but because it no longer needs to be announced. This is why certain realizations feel urgent only briefly, and why their absence later can feel strangely empty. November 16th. In this frame is not destiny and not fate. It marks the end of a compensatory phase, the point where the psyche stops repeating itself because it assumes the message has either been received or declined. Nothing dramatic occurs at that boundary. No reward appears. No loss is imposed. The psyche simply moves on, and what once insisted quietly fades, not to return in the same voice again. As this compensatory phase closes, something subtle but decisive occurs. The message stops seeking you. Thoughts that once returned with insistence no longer circle. Emotional themes that used to press for resolution soften, then fade, not because life has suddenly improved, but because amplification is no longer required. The psyche repeats itself only when it doubts it has been heard. Repetition is not obsession, and it is not pathology. It is instruction delivered through pressure. When understanding has not yet registered, the psyche raises the volume. When it has, silence follows. This shift often confuses people because it lacks drama. There is no breakthrough moment, no surge of relief, no sense of victory. What appears instead is neutrality. The issue that once felt charged now feels oddly unimportant, almost unfinished, yet no longer demanding completion. This anticlimax is misread as avoidance or suppression, but it is neither. It is resolution without celebration. Jung understood that consciousness does not need to remember what it has structurally absorbed. Once an insight has reorganized perception, it no longer needs to announce itself. The mind does not keep knocking on a door that has already opened. This is why disappearance is not loss, it is confirmation. The psyche withdraws signals once their function has been fulfilled. Many people mistake growth for intensity, assuming clarity must arrive with emotional force. In reality, depth often expresses itself through quiet absence. You notice the change only in retrospect, when when you realize that something which once shaped your inner weather has stopped casting a shadow. The narrative dissolves. The emotional charge evaporates, not because it was defeated, but because it was integrated beyond narration. This is why silence matters more than insight here. Silence indicates that the psyche trusts the new configuration enough to stop instructing it. When the inner voice that once repeated itself grows quiet, it is not indifference. It is completion. When the psyche no longer repeats itself, it's not because nothing matters. It's because something finally landed. This quiet withdrawal marks the closing of a cycle. Consciousness will not revisit in the same form again. As the inner messages fall silent, urgency follows them into retirement. What once pressed, rushed, and tightened begins to loosen. Not because purpose has vanished, but because its function has been fulfilled. Urgency is not a personality trait. It is a psychic tool. It appears when awareness must be forced into motion, when consciousness risks stagnating inside unresolved material. Anxiety, pressure, and the sense that something must happen now are stabilizers during disorder. They keep attention engaged, thinking alive, movement continuous. Without them, earlier stages of transformation would collapse into avoidance. But once internal order forms, the same pressure becomes intrusive. It no longer organizes experience. It distorts it. This is where confusion arises. Calm is misread as loss of ambition. Slowness is mistaken for stagnation. The nervous system, accustomed to urgency as a companion, interprets its absence as danger. Yet what has actually occurred is a structural shift. The ego no longer requires fear to maintain coherence. It is not being chased by unresolved demands, so it does not need speed to stay intact. Action becomes optional rather than compulsory. Thought no longer races to justify movement. Decisions arise without the tremor of consequence attached to every choice. This does not produce passivity. It produces selectivity. Energy moves toward what is necessary, not what is urgent. Jung understood that psychic pressure compensates imbalance, not meaning. When balance returns, compensation withdraws. What remains is a quieter form of motion, one guided by readiness instead of alarm. This phase feels unsettling because it lacks the familiar fuel of tension. There is nothing pushing from behind, no threat demanding progress. But nothing is pulling backward either. Movement, when it occurs, feels precise, unforced, almost incidental. This is not the death of drive. It is the end of coercion. When urgency fades, it's not motivation that's gone. It's the inner chaos that required it. This space is transitional, asking tolerance rather than action, trust rather than acceleration, allowing the psyche to test stability without pressure, proving that equilibrium can hold without urgency, and quietly preparing consciousness for what comes next. Now, as urgency releases its grip, identity follows it into quiet suspension. Without pressure demanding explanation, the self stops asking to be confirmed. You may notice that the impulse to narrate who you are weakens. Introducing yourself internally, justifying your choices, or framing experiences through a familiar storyline begins to feel unnecessary, even faintly artificial. Old self-descriptions sound exaggerated, as if they belong to a role you once played convincingly but no longer inhabit. This can feel disorienting, not because something has been lost, but because something has stopped insisting. The psyche no longer needs constant self-definition to remain coherent. Psychologically, this is a natural sequence. Identity structures dissolve before new ones appear. The mind does not replace a persona immediately. It clears space first. Silence is preferred over false continuity. Where once the self spoke reflexively, filling gaps with labels and explanations, there is now a pause. That pause is often misread as emptiness, when in reality, it is neutrality. Jung understood the persona as a tool for movement, not a permanent identity. It organizes adaptation to the world. But when it no longer protects psychic movement, it collapses quietly. There is no dramatic breakdown, no inner argument. The persona simply loses conviction. You abandon explanations mid-thought. Validation feels irrelevant, not because confidence has increased, but because the need for confirmation has expired. This is where the never again quality enters, not as loss, but as closure. Once identity stops requiring reinforcement, it cannot be revived in the same way. You may still remember who you were, but you cannot convincingly perform it. The psyche has moved past the need to announce itself. What remains is a temporary anonymity, a period where the self is no longer defined, but not yet reformed. This phase is often brief but unmistakable. It carries a sense of finality without drama. The old self does not end in conflict. It ends when it no longer needs to speak. There is no argument to resolve, no decision to finalize. The silence itself is the ending. As the old self falls silent, meaning itself begins to loosen its grip. You may notice that the impulse to interpret what is happening fades. Experiences no longer arrive, asking to be translated into lessons, symbols, or personal narratives. Events register cleanly and then pass, complete without requiring explanation. Where you once searched for significance, you now observe without extracting insight. Internally, this feels subtle but unmistakable. You notice moments without immediately contextualizing them. Questions may still arise, but they no longer carry urgency or emotional charge. Even experiences that once demanded reflection or analysis feel oddly whole on their own. This shift can feel unsettling at first, because meaning-making once provided orientation. Interpretation created movement, a sense of progression through understanding. Without it, consciousness feels spacious but unfamiliar, as though a familiar inner dialogue has stepped aside. Psychologically, this marks a crucial structural change. Jung understood symbols not as destinations, but as bridges between unconscious material and conscious awareness. Interpretation exists only while mediation is necessary. When consciousness reorganizes, the bridge is crossed, and fixation on meaning becomes redundant. Nothing is lost, but the need to explain dissolves. This is not numbness, it is maturity. Awareness without commentary indicates that the psyche no longer requires constant translation to remain oriented. Experience can now be met directly without the buffer of explanation. Life does not feel shallow here. It feels immediate. The mind no longer needs to turn everything into a story to stay coherent. This is often mistaken for detachment or disengagement, but it is neither. It is presence without narration. You are still responsive, still sensitive, still aware. What has disappeared is the reflex to turn every sensation into a conclusion. The psyche has learned that it does not need constant interpretation to stay alive. This is why the disappearance of meaning feels strange before it feels natural. Meaning once functioned as a stabilizer, a way of holding experience together. But once inner organization stabilizes, meaning-making becomes optional. Consciousness no longer needs to grasp. It can rest inside experience as it is. This phase carries a quiet authority. Not the authority of certainty, but the authority of sufficiency. Nothing needs to be added for the moment to be complete. Nothing needs to be taken away. Experience arrives, registers, and passes without residue. The psyche trusts itself to remain coherent without commentary. When meaning stops demanding interpretation, it is not because nothing matters, but because presence itself has become sufficient. The psyche no longer needs to extract value from experience in order to justify it. Being here is no longer something that needs explanation. As this settling continues, you may notice that time itself feels different. Moments are no longer measured by their usefulness or significance. They are simply inhabited. Attention rests without scanning for the next insight. Awareness lingers without trying to arrive anywhere. This is not stagnation. It is stabilization. The psyche has crossed a threshold where effort is no longer required to maintain orientation. Consciousness no longer needs to lean forward into meaning or backward into memory. It can remain where it is without strain. This is the quiet competence that follows integration. Nothing announces this shift. There is no internal signal confirming that something important has happened. That is precisely how you know it is real. The psyche does not celebrate equilibrium, it simply inhabits it. When interpretation falls away, what remains is not confusion, but clarity without commentary. This is the middle ground between what was and what will be. Identity has loosened, urgency has withdrawn, meaning has softened. But nothing new has rushed in to replace them. The psyche is testing whether it can remain whole without scaffolding, whether awareness can hold itself without pressure, explanation, or definition. This is not a void. It is a pause. And like all pauses, it is easily misread. The mind wants to fill it, name it, move through it. But the psyche is asking for something else here. It is asking for tolerance, for the willingness to remain present without direction, for the capacity to not rush the next structure into place. This pause is where real stability is proven. Not by action, not by insight, not by intensity, but by the ability to remain without interference. If consciousness can stay here without panic, without invention, without urgency, then whatever forms next will not be a reaction. It will be an emergence. As this settling completes, nothing needs to be done to confirm it. The body already knows before the mind reaches for language. You may notice a quiet steadiness in your physical presence, a sense of being here without scanning for the next internal adjustment. Breathing continues without emphasis. Posture holds itself without correction. Attention rests without effort. There is no urge to interfere, explain, or move anything forward. What has reorganized does not need to announce itself. Stability does not arrive as excitement. It arrives as the absence of disturbance. This phase often feels almost unremarkable, which is precisely how you know it is real. When internal structures have settled, the psyche no longer asks for proof. Awareness simply remains grounded in sensation and perception, without trying to shape the moment into meaning or progress. Nothing is waiting to happen because nothing is unfinished. This is how completion registers inside consciousness, quietly, bodily, without instruction. There is no internal checklist being reviewed, no sense of having arrived somewhere important. The need to evaluate experience dissolves. Life continues, but without the internal commentary that once accompanied every shift. You are no longer watching yourself from the inside, measuring, adjusting, or narrating. You are simply here, and as the message withdraws, the date itself loses its drama. November 16th is not a reward or a threat. It marks the point where repetition ends because it is no longer required. If something once felt urgent, demanding, or symbolic, Its silence now is not loss but confirmation. The psyche has moved on. This is often where people become uneasy. Not because something is wrong, but because nothing is calling them forward. The familiar tension that once guided movement has faded. Without it, direction feels less obvious. But this absence is not emptiness. It is space. Space that has not yet been claimed by the next configuration. The question that arises here is not what comes next, but whether you can tolerate the space that follows. If nothing is calling you forward right now, what happens if you don't rush to replace it? If there is no inner voice demanding action, no urgency insisting on movement, can you remain present without inventing a reason to move? This is where old habits resurface. The impulse to manufacture purpose, to assign meaning prematurely, to create urgency where none exists. But the psyche is no longer responding to those strategies. They feel hollow, forced, ineffective. What once motivated now feels artificial because the system no longer needs to be pushed. Jung understood this phase as a necessary interval, a time when the psyche rests between structures, not collapsing, not advancing, but stabilizing. The ego often misinterprets this as stagnation because it is accustomed to equating movement with health. But psychic health is not measured by speed. It is measured by coherence. Here, coherence exists without effort. You are not held together by tension, fear, or aspiration. You are held together by integration. The system is no longer compensating for imbalance. It is simply functioning. This is why there is so little to say about it internally. Nothing is asking for attention. This can feel anticlimactic, especially if you expected transformation to announce itself with clarity or direction. Instead, what appears is neutrality, a sense that life is continuing without instruction. This is not a failure of insight, it is the completion of it. You may notice that external events no longer trigger the same internal reactions. Situations that once provoked analysis or emotional charge now register and pass. There is responsiveness, but not entanglement. Engagement without over-identification. The psyche no longer needs to extract lessons from every encounter to justify its movement. This does not mean life has become shallow. It has become direct. Experience is met as experience, not as material for interpretation. You are no longer standing between yourself and the moment, translating it into meaning. You are inside it. This is why nothing dramatic happens next. There is no next phase announced. No clear instruction arrives. The psyche is no longer compensating, correcting, or instructing. It is waiting, not passively, but openly, allowing whatever forms next to emerge without coercion. This waiting is not idle. It is attentive. Awareness remains present without leaning forward. The system is testing whether it can trust stability without pressure, whether coherence can hold without urgency, whether identity can remain fluid without collapsing into confusion. If you can remain here without forcing direction, something different becomes possible. Movement that is not reactive, identity that is not defensive, meaning that is not manufactured. Whatever emerges next will not be a correction. It will be a continuation. This is why the closing feels final without feeling dramatic. The old cycle does not end in conflict. It ends in silence. The psyche does not announce that it is finished. It simply stops speaking about it. And once that happens, it will not return in the same form again. What comes after does not arrive as an answer. It arrives as readiness. A readiness that does not need to be named. When the time comes to move, movement will feel simple, unforced, obvious. Not because you have decided, but because the system is aligned enough to respond. Until then, nothing is missing. Nothing is delayed. Nothing needs to be resolved. The work that needed to be done has already reorganized you. The rest is not something to figure out. It is something to allow. This is Echoes of Psyche, where awareness quietly meets the unseen structures of the mind and heart, where silence is not absence, but completion, where nothing repeats because nothing needs to, and where what comes next will not need urgency to arrive.